Hello, I'm here with three of our board members, Harmony Garges and Charles Merritt and Kristen Blair, to talk a bit about the board of Trinity, the Board of Trustees. The board is public. You can go on our website. You can see who's on the board. The minutes are public. But not lots of people at Trinity know what goes on, what the board does. And so I thought it would be great to just talk a little bit about this really important work of the board. Charles, thank you for serving as a chair of the board.
It's a
There's
pleasure.
an extra load of that on that, I know. And Charles and I meet pretty much every week to talk about what's going on in the school. What does the board do? What's the role of the board?
So the main role of the board is really to preserve and protect the mission of Trinity School. And if you had to pick one thing to say that we do, that's the most important thing that we do. And so that means our focus is really long-term and strategic, and we're thinking about the students who aren't here yet as opposed to our own children and the children and teachers and faculty who are here today. One of the other roles of the board, and really the only thing that we do that touches on personnel at all, is we do hire and retain our head of school. So Dr. Denton serves at the pleasure of the Board of Trustees, but that's our only role that we play anywhere in personnel matters, and it's really the only employee that we review and consistently check in on. Everything else is handled by senior staff and administration. So.
Yeah. So that distinction of the board is not managing or running the school, but the board is involved in strategic leadership, support, guarding the mission. Yeah.
Correct. I think one of the other really important things that we do is we perpetuate the Board of Trustees. We have a committee, a trustees committee, that really, it helps us select the next generation of board members, and that's very important at a mission-driven school. The Christian mission, the unhurried, the classical, all the things that are really the distinctives of Trinity School, we're looking to preserve and protect those by bringing on people who are like-minded, who support that mission the same way that we do.
Yeah. The three of you are parents, and so it's a challenge to serve on the board as parents. It's a great opportunity, and there's great benefit in having parents. I think about 60% of our board is parents. But you have to take one hat off and put another hat on, don't you? Can you talk a little bit about that, any of you?
I'll start, but the short answer is yes. And you really have to rely on, frankly, your spouse, your husband or your wife when you serve on the board. And sometimes you have issues and you want to be the advocate for your particular child. We're very careful to not do that. It's a line that I think it is hard. It's a challenge. There are times where you want to go in and say something and do something, and like all of us do as parents.
Right.
But you do have to put on a very different hat as a board member and rely on your spouse really to the extent that there are advocacy issues for your child. They're the ones who really handle those.
Yeah.
There's sort of a different role too, because the board is very forward-thinking in terms of anticipating what might lie ahead and looking forward to carrying out the mission of the school. And the parenting is so present and here and now, so there's kind of that duality in terms of balancing that role, but looking more for families 5 to 10 years from now, how will the mission be carried forth for those families? So.
Yeah. And what Charles said about perpetuating the board, I think is so important because we are a self-perpetuating board. There's no other institution outside of Trinity that will take care of Trinity if Trinity doesn't take care of Trinity, if the board doesn't choose the next board who will guard the mission. And so 25 years from now, will Trinity still be here? And will it still be the school that we have all loved and given to and devoted our efforts to? And that we want to be able to answer that yes, and that's the job of the board. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, that's great. Well, the board works through committees, and two of you are chairs of two of those committees. There's several of them. Harmony, can you talk a little bit about your committee? And then Kristen, I'd love for you to do the same.
Sure, happy to. Thanks, Chip. So I chair the Advancement Committee, and the Advancement Committee's remit is really looking out for the future of Trinity School, both from a financial perspective and fundraising perspective, as well as community outreach. So when we think about advancement, we think about it holistically, and we do spend a good amount of time talking about fundraising, either through individual donors or corporate sponsors. But a huge part of what we do is looking for ways to really engage with the community so we can pull the community into Trinity School, and so we can share with the community all the wonderful things about Trinity School.
Yeah, that's great. And Kristen, your committee?
Education Committee.
Yep.
So looking at the intersection of the mission and academic matters of the school and how that manifests and what that looks like. I really appreciate one aspect of the committee is that it's very evidence-based in terms of how we're looking at things. And I know when we were anticipating a number of years ago the Digital Learning Initiative, looking at research on that and what research says. Another issue is looking at school start times and what the research says about that. So there's a very deliberate and careful, thoughtful approach to looking at those sorts of issues and just various components of the mission of the school in terms of unhurried too, what that looks like, yielded a family time policy. So those kinds of matters are the kinds of things that we look at.
Yeah. And keeping the Education Committee operating at a certain altitude on those larger policy kinds of questions is one of the things we're always working at, so that the Education Committee doesn't get into managing what's going on in a third grade classroom.
Yes.
That's not the job of the board. But there are really important larger questions that touch the mission that we felt that not all independent schools have education committees, and there's a risk that comes with that, but there's a great opportunity here. I think I've really felt the benefit of our committee and being able to tackle some of these issues.
Yeah, the bird's eye view. I
Right.
like the nose in and fingers out. That's
Yeah.
kind of a good guiding motto.
That is a great guiding motto. So I think that's another John Hand-ism. Yeah. John served on the board for, I think, a decade, and he left a strong mark, yeah. Harmony, tell us about some work that the Advancement Committee has been doing as an example.
Sure. So one really recent example that the Advancement Committee has worked on and ultimately came to the board for a decision were discussions around a feasibility study. So we are having discussions right now based on our strategic plan about a next capital campaign. And there's lots of questions that have to be addressed when you're looking at that type of question. So the Advancement Committee was intimately involved working with you and Chris Sparks in terms of talking about what type of organization, what type of external group we should enlist to help us with that. And then ultimately, what should be the goal of the campaign? That's a really big question, and you have to balance a lot of different factors, including the strategic priorities of the school. And that was a very recent decision that the Advancement Committee was crucially involved with the board.
Yeah. And each of these committees, and it would be true for almost all the board's committees, are chaired by a board member, and there may be other board members who serve on those committees, but there are non-board members on the committees. In fact, that we highly value that.
Yes.
And staff also serve on these committees. Yeah.
And I think, and Chip, that's a great point to make. And this is a real opportunity if you have a passion,
Absolutely.
a talent, or a skill that would serve on one of our committees, the Finance Committee, the Investment Committee, Koinonia, Advancement, Land and Building, Education. It's a great opportunity for you to learn more about the school and learn more about its mission and support it with your own passions and skills. So it's a great opportunity. If anyone's interested, they can find any of us, any board member, come find you or any
Yep,
senior administrative
absolutely.
person and find out more about the committees and how you can serve. We rely on volunteers. And the work of the board is really done in these committees. So it's important work, and we value the participation of our families.
Absolutely. And you just named most of the committees that we have, or 6 or 7 standing committees of the board. The board will, from time to time, establish specific task forces that have a shelf life to get into a more specific issue, particularly if it doesn't fit into one of our established committees. But yeah, there's great opportunities there. So we have mentioned the strategic plan of the board. Why don't we talk about that explicitly? What the board has just passed a new strategic plan for the next 3 years. What's on that plan, Charles?
Sure. And there are 3 things, as you mentioned. The first is really how can we better care for our faculty and staff, and that really is a lot of work around compensation and benefits and making sure that the people who work here and labor here on behalf of our families are appropriately compensated. We have work to do in that area. We actually, as you mentioned, we've had a task force that's focused on this and done a tremendous amount of work, benchmarking work to look at similar sized schools and where we rank on that. And so the outcome of that has been one of our key, really our first and primary imperative strategically, is making sure that we raise compensation levels, provide competitive benefit packages, and make sure that our faculty and staff are well taken care of. So that's the first one. The second one is a focus on Christian spiritual formation, which is it's some complicated words sometimes, but it's really thinking about how in the life of our school and our curriculum and things like service learning and really all the aspects of our educational experience here, are we representing the Christian worldview well? How are we helping our students to advance in their faith, to learn more about the Christian faith and what that means in their lives? So this is really a big one. It's all encompassing. We've had a board member, Christy Chalfin, who helped do a tremendous amount of work on this because she has relevant experience. She teaches in Christian higher education. So she's bringing her skills and abilities to that important strategic area. The last one is around diversity. And that really, in a Christian context, the kingdom of God is made up of people from many nations, many places, and we're trying to think about what does that look like in the life of Trinity School, to have a greater appreciation for our differences as well as the areas where we share commonality in our Christian faith, and that's a really important one. They're all three important. We're careful not to bite off too many, so 3 is probably about the most we can handle at any given time.
3 years, yeah.
So we're excited about all of these, and the work is ongoing. The work of the board and the work of the committees that will focus on this will go on for the next several years.
Yeah. And some of that work fits right into the board structure. So the work around diversity and inclusion is right down the center lane of what our koinonia committee, or which is a biblical word for partnership across differences, and so our diversity committee essentially will be riding herd on that. The faculty staff compensation piece, the staff has to own a lot of that, but I know that the advancement committee has been very involved in conversations about the possibility of fundraising to support faculty and staff.
That's absolutely right. So that's part of the feasibility study that we'll be assessing in the coming weeks.
Yep. And the Christian mission touches everything we do, so
Absolutely.
it belongs, it very well may come to the Education Committee at some point to talk about that. We may end up setting up a special task force to sort of monitor this one to make sure that the strategic plan that we have gets carried out. So there's plenty to do. The board is never bored. We meet 10 times a year, about 9 or 10 times a year, monthly, basically during the school year. And then on top of that, the board meets twice a year for a half a day on Saturdays for retreats. Can one of you say a little bit about those times? Those are really important. What are some of the things we've done at those?
Sure, I can, and those are, generally they're topical. We take one area and dive into it much deeper than we would have the time to do in a regularly scheduled board meeting. So our board meetings usually run about 2 to 2.5 hours. Our regular ones, we take Saturday morning from 7:30 till noon or after, and we'll dive into a particular topic, and that
A little
is
more unhurried.
little more unhurried. We'll have people generate reports. For example, Kristen did a great report on kind of the demographics and the landscape for education in our area. That was amazing data that we were able to then dive into in a less hurried way. And what can we glean from that about where we're going as a school? Who do we compete with? How many students are going to come into this area over the next 5 and 10 years? And so what are some of the trends that will drive independent schools? So that was just one example of taking a little bit more time to dive into an issue more deeply. And it's a privilege to be able to do that. But again, it requires some work and effort to get there and then really engage to think about these things and how they impact the school. So.
That's great. Yeah. So, one of my favorite traditions on the board is that when board members come to the end of their terms, and we have three-year terms that board members can serve, and there's actually been a lot of discussion among schools in the North Carolina Association about board terms. And Charles, you and I were at a
Right.
meeting recently where there was lots of conversation, discussion about this. But Trinity allows relatively long runs for board members, and I think that was actually affirmed at the conference that we heard. So you can serve 3 + 3 + 3, and even part of, if you come in, you could serve 10 years. But at the end of a board member's term, at the last meeting, we asked board members to say a few words. I still remember what some board members said, really powerful messages. So I might put you all on the spot to think, what do you want your legacy to be, or what are things that you think are really important for the board to know, to remember? What kinds of things might you say at your last meeting? Anybody want to grab that one?
I'll take a short deep dive. It's actually not a deep dive, but very consistent with what we've been saying about the goal of the board is just fidelity to the mission of Trinity School. I love the mission of the school, and it's so well crafted and thoughtful, and it encompasses so much about how we approach our worldview, how we approach education, not just spiritually but philosophically, and what that looks like. There are lots of fads and trends in education and things that come around, what that looks like and how to test it and hold that up as the plumb line. There are different questions as the years go by, but just really holding fast to fidelity to the mission of the school. And that's a lot easier said than done in terms of what that looks like. But
I
think
really
it's
appreciate you
really
saying that, Kristen. It is, I think there are boards where people come on and they just are sort of biding their time, or they're on there for perfunctory reasons, and they might be doing much good for the institution. But the Trinity Board is a place where I think I'd say it's about all 13 members of the board. They are deeply committed to the mission of the school, and I think also deeply committed to finding others to follow them to be deeply committed to the mission. And that's
probably good
key.
preparation for board service for me was serving on the education committee and taking a very
Absolutely.
unhurried approach to rewriting the expanded mission statement. I think we spent a year on it. So, but just a sense of love and respect for that mission and what it means and how important it is. It's good.
Charles or Harmony, what would you say?
I will borrow heavily from, you'll remember Peter Fever when he left. The biggest distinctive that we have, at least locally in the immediate area, is we are a Christian school.
Yes.
DA is right down the road. There are other options for private independent schools here. Our strategic difference is that we are a Christian school. And we have to hold on to that, and we have to emphasize that. We have to make that part of everything that we do. But we have so many unique characteristics as a Christian school. We're not a covenant school. We have people who are Christians. We have people of other faiths. We have non-Christians. How do you do that well? And as to Kristen's point, honor the beautiful mission that we have that has served us well since the beginning, and we think will continue to serve us well. But our strategic difference is our Christian mission, and how do we hold on to that effectively, I think is a key part of what we do, unashamedly, unabashedly, holding on to our Christian worldview.
Yeah, and I think that is reflected in our new strategic plan, that one of those goals is to try to, we are already doing Christian formation, but we want to do it even better. We want to keep getting better at the thing that is most important.
Right.
Yeah. Harmony?
So for me, I echo everything that Charles and Kristen said, and I think the board is absolutely passionate about the mission, and we look for that in our trustees and in future trustees. So we're certainly aligned to that, and I would also say the most distinctive feature is the Christian piece of it, but there's other parts of our mission that are also critically important, about truth, goodness, and beauty, and about being unhurried, especially at the lower school levels. And I think that also makes Trinity distinctive. And the upper school curriculum, we're not an AP school. right? Because we believe in depth and quality over quantity. So for me, it's really about preserving all of that, everything about Trinity School that makes it so unique, so wonderful, such a fantastic place to raise our children. And the only addition I would add is, again, we need to ensure that Trinity School is still here in 20 years and 200 years, and that it still looks how it looks today, that it still holds those values. And so the only other piece I would say I'm hoping for my legacy is around taking care of Trinity from the financial perspective as well, and really making sure we're setting it up and being fiscally responsible and leaving it in a really good place financially so it can last and sustain.
Yeah, through good stewardship and through generosity.
Absolutely.
Through all that, Well, I can't thank you all enough for talking with me today, and I hope this is helpful to our school community to hear just a little bit about the board. It's a privilege and a pleasure for me to work with you all, and maybe we could end by singing the Non Nobis together. No, I won't make you do that.
Not on camera.
But
Well,
thank
I
you.
want to end by saying thank you to you. We wouldn't be here without you, all the work and the labor that you put into Trinity School. This conference that Chip just referenced that we were at, Chip is one of the longest serving heads of school anywhere in the country, and we have benefited from that greatly. So thank you for everything that you do to protect and preserve the mission here. Thanks.
Well, it's a privilege. Thank you. I do appreciate the relationship between myself as head and the board. I think that's so important to the health of a school. If I were checking out another school, that's one of the first things I would check into is what's going on with the board and what is that relationship. And so thank you for all of you, and Charles, you as the chair. So
Thank you.
all right.
It's our pleasure.
Non Nobis.